علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الناصرين
على القوم الكافرين.
القوم الكافرين.
جزاك الله.
جزاك الله خير. تكبير.
الله.
Takbir. MashaAllah, Nasruddin is only 11 years old, MashaAllah, and he's already finished doing his of the Quran, MashaAllah. Good job, brother. Come on, you can grab a seat with the rest of us over here. We've got quite a few presentations here today, and our MC for tonight is a sister I greatly admire. Not because she's an HR professional or because she's a very accomplished volunteer here at ICW. It's because I'm good friends with her husband. And I know how much she deals with on a daily basis. So, without any further ado, let's, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sister Asma Hasni.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair for attending the ICW's new version of the monthly program. Again, my name is Asma, and I'll be the MC for tonight's program. This evening, we're focused on an event we put together that was put together by Toastmasters, ICW Toastmasters group. Our goal is to showcase what's been happening at ICW with thought leadership among the youth and adults. We have two great speeches lined up along with an interactive portion where we encourage our audience, both online and in person, to participate in. We'll have a Q&A at the end and inshallah finish with Isha prayers at 8:30. We'll start off our first talk by our youth of the Toastmasters, Hussain, Koshul, Mariam, Ahmed, and Yusuf Hussain. The three have been working diligently since May to help create a sustainable charity modeling group of individuals from our community on a microfinance site called Kiva. Hussain is currently a senior at UIC, majoring in education with a focus in history. He's a captain of the ET team on Kiva, and he also works for CBS Sports covering the Chicago Bears. He's passionate about education because it has an impact on future generations. Mariam is an undergrad student at Loyola University, majoring in bioinformatics. She likes to travel, go boating, and reading. She's interested in pursuing a career in artificial intelligence, inshallah. Yusuf is a hafiz in 9th grade at Glenbard West High School. He likes to play soccer, travel to see wildlife, and enjoys the outdoors. He's also working towards a black belt in karate. Please welcome Hussain, Mariam, and Yusuf.
Alright. So everyone, thanks for coming out tonight, especially considering we have to do it with social distance. I want to start by asking you guys a question. Have you ever heard of the quote, "Give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime"? Have you ever heard of this quote that's up on the screen at all?
Yeah. Yes.
So I see some of you guys in the audience raise your hands that yes, we've heard of this quote. Well, let's break it down. What does this quote mean? If you look at the first part, it says, "Give a man a fish, he eats for a day." That's basically implying that you can make a change in one day in someone's life, but that's only a temporary change because what you're doing is just giving them something. But if you teach someone a skill, what happens? That's the lasting and sustaining change when we look at the second part of the quote. It's a lasting and sustaining change because now that person is essentially, now they know how to fish, now they're fending for themselves, not just tomorrow or the day after, for months and years to come. Now, let me ask you guys this. How do you think we can apply this quote to something like microfinance? So let's talk about how we can use our change to create some sort of actual change. Let's talk about what microfinance is, guys. Is anyone familiar with this concept? All right, so I see one person. Microfinance is a special type of finance. It's not like your regular finance. It's a type of bank. So it's not like Chase or Bank of America. It's focused on two types of individuals. Number one is, or two types of groups, I'm sorry. Number one is specific individuals, or number two is groups that do not have access to rapid financial services. What's the goal behind microfinance? It's to create, again, like referencing back to the quote, a lasting change. Who's the founder of this concept, you may ask? It's a Bangladeshi Muslim by the name of Ahmed. He started it up in about 2006, and it's developed into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Right now, we've got a short video that I want you guys to watch and pay attention to one of the people that's specifically in the video. Alright, so it looks like the video is not working, unfortunately, but I'll explain it. Pretty much what it explains is what Kiva is, and there's a Muslim sister in there who's got a bridal business, and she's used the loans that she's able to get from Kiva to fund her business. Let's talk about lender uses. The people that use our platform, what types of businesses does this stuff go to? Well, you have number one, cattle and livestock. So you could have someone, for example, in a underdeveloped market that has a farm. Someone could have a clothing business. Education. Now, education is broken down specifically into things like school uniforms and books. Number four, we have agriculture, another really good industry that uses this platform. Seeds and fertilizers go under agriculture. And number five is food products. And this one's really noteworthy. Pay attention to it because in just a moment I'm going to explain a field example to you. Now you're probably asking yourself, all right, so say it's doing a lot of different things actually. What exactly is Kiva? It's a microfinance organization, guys, that was founded back in 2005. So been around for 15 and a half years now. The key thing with this is that it was inspired by Muhammad Yunus. It was not in any way, shape, or form started by Muhammad Yunus. So what happened here exactly, this is like a tree, and I'll use this analogy, is that Yunus planted a seed for microfinance, and trees, as we all know, have a number of different branches. What happened with this seed and this tree? Well, Kiva essentially grew to be one of the separate branches. Over the last 10 years, Kiva has funded about 2 million people, and the loan repayment rate is 96%. What's this goal of this kind of international organization? It is to go ahead and to serve underserved communities. I want to show you guys a quick field example. This right here is a group of about 19 women, and the leader is actually right there on the left side of the screen in the yellow. You can't see her, unfortunately, too well because of the glare. But this is a group of 19 women in Senegal. The leader is a mom of 8. She's got, of the 8, she's got 6 daughters and 2 sons. The sons are the youngest. This group specifically, they use our loan to be able to fund their business, and they run like a ice cream shop, a juice shop, for example, and the supplies that they get, they use it to make the juices. So they'll buy things such as sugar, specific types of fruits that are only available in Senegal. Next, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Yusuf to talk about who we are.
I was standing here today and talking to you about microfinance. Us three are actually the leaders of a team called Experience Transformation on the Kiva platform. And our goal is to create and sustain lasting change in the people that we donate to. So what are some of the criteria that we try to follow when we're looking for people to lend to? So one thing that we try to follow is we try to have the recipient be a Muslim person. 2, we try to focus on lending to women and groups because it's statistically proven that when you lend to a woman, they'll use the money to better themselves as well as the community, more so than if you lend to men. Number 3, we try to lend to people who will use the money for educational purposes. And number 4, we try to have a quick repayment rate. So ideally less than 24 months so that the money can get back to you quicker and you can re-lend again and again to more people. So here's our team's impact report so far. So as you can see, according to our criteria, 71% of the people we've donated, led to, have been female and 29% male. We've lent over $3,000 ever since our team was established. And some of the sectors that we led to are retail, agriculture, food, education, as I mentioned, services, and clothing. So now let's see a real world example of how exactly Kiva and microfinance works. So let's say you wanted to lend $1,000 every year for the next 25 years. And every time that money was repaid back to you, since you're lending instead of donating, you would re-lend the money again and again to different people. So over 25 years, the money that you put in would be $25,000. But since you helped more people by re-lending, it actually can have an impact of $250,000 to $325,000. So this shows just how much your money, the impact that your money can have grows exponentially when you lend rather than donate. And these numbers that I mentioned are assuming that loans are repaid within a year. So now here's a man named Kazakbek. He's from Kyrgyzstan. He's 45 years old and he provides shepherding services. Before he started asking for a loan, he had 3 cows, 6 sheep, and a horse on his land. Our team helped his cause, and alhamdulillah, he was able to buy another horse. This increased the head count on his farm, which allows him to have a greater income. Kazakbek uses all of the profit he makes to support his family. So here are some statistics of our team. So as you can see, those are some of the countries we've lent to. The lighter shaded ones have less loans, and then the darker shaded ones have more. Those are on the bottom are the top 4 countries we've lent to so far. So Senegal, Tajikistan, Mali, and Egypt. We've had 55 total loans in the past 5 months, split amongst 18 team members. So that amounts to about 3 loans per member. And also, we've lent to 12 of the 76 countries, including the inactive ones that are on the Kiva platform. So now that you know about what microfinance is and who we are, what experience transformation is, I'm gonna turn it over to Mariam, and she'll tell you about probably the 2 most important things you need to know. 1, why you should join our team, and 2, how you can join our team.
endorsing such a concept as microfinance. First of all, we want to renew our intentions and think of how sadaqah is highly valued in our religion because it surely purifies the money and adds blessings overall. Second of all, it's simply more than just money going out. It's a purposeful donation because you know what your money is being used for. Your recipient might be in need of sending their kids to school, or raising cattle, or whatever the case may be. This is essentially to help them grow out of poverty by teaching them some lessons that will hopefully last with them for generations to come. And by the end of the loan, hopefully they will reach their financial goal that they set for themselves. So we want to talk to you about what would you expect from us, our team, and how does our team roll, okay? So transparency on our website, you can expect full team transparency on our website where you can see all of our activities and team members and the collective impact to Akiva from the amount of money to the categories we are funding, as well as the geographical impact and the countries that are being helped out by our money. And we also provide a monthly newsletter where we keep our members updated with our month-to-month progress, as well as a list of loan recommendations of pre-screened loans by us. And this is where you can trust us managing your loans efficiently and securely because with every loan that we recommend, we give a brief summary about the recipient and the nature of their financial need. And this promising initiative requires minimal effort compared to the size of impact that it has. It's eye-opening to see what you can do with 5 minutes and some change. Taking this loan, for example. So Jumago was actually my first loan, and I chose her because she has her own sewing business. She uses the loan money to buy fabric and sews dresses together, then sells them. And this is not her first time doing it. She's done it before on Kiva. And I think that this model actually really creates a lasting change because with that, she can support her family better. On the other hand, though, we want to establish some of the responsibilities from our members. So as lenders and team members, it's obviously a responsibility of yours to choose the money increment that you see fit for any loan, starting with the increment of $25. And as we mentioned before, this is only going to take a couple minutes just to choose a loan and then decide on it at the end at the checkout. We also want to emphasize the point of interest because there's absolutely no interest on your money. Just like 100% of your money goes to your recipient as is. And there's also absolutely no contact with the recipients. The only contact that happens is when the recipient wants to give feedback to team members about loans that they received. And this is just some contact information. This is our team email, kivaetteam@gmail.com. You can go ahead and contact us anytime that you have questions. And this is also our website on Kiva. It's also, you can get there by the QR code on the next slide. And we want to encourage everyone to invite family and friends and scan the QR code to get more informed about Kiva. And we want to encourage everyone to invite family and friends just to increase our impact on Kiva. Next, I'll give it over to Assad for some last thoughts.
So, before we get to the final stage of the presentation, I want to give you guys a quick overview of who our team organizers are. So, I'm going to say Koshul, that's me, and then Yusuf and Mariam, and then Assad, Koshul, and Hussain, they're here in the crowd tonight. They do help oversee a lot of things because of them that this entire project was started. Right now you see up on the screen a QR code. If you have your iPhone or Android device and it has the ability to scan, I know that a lot of the newer phones do have the scanning or the scan your QR code through your camera. So you don't have to download an app anymore. You can go ahead and scan this QR code. It is going to allow you to join our team. Once you do that, just make sure you email us at kivaetteam@gmail.com. If you need more information, you can reach out to that email too, and either myself, Yusuf, or Mariam will get back to you within a 24-hour time span. If you need more information, you can talk to one of us after the program is over, or you can go ahead and email that as well if you have to leave as soon as Isha prayer is over. But jazakallah khair so much, everybody, for coming out. For those of you that are online, thank you for tuning in as well. We do hope that a lot of you guys will join this initiative after today. Inshallah, we hope to see a lot of you guys, not just today or tomorrow, but help us to continue and create a lasting and sustaining change. That's not just going to bring change today or tomorrow. It's going to apply to the quote that we mentioned. We're going to see the results years and years down the road.
Anyways, thanks again, Hussain, Mariam, and Yusuf for enlightening us on how we can help others in need and make a continuous form of charity, inshallah. We'd love to get at least 5 people from our audience, both here or in person and online, to be added to the Kiva tonight. Can we get a show of hands on who can do this just by lending or donating $25 for one loan? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, great. Jazakallah khair. This is a great way to encourage, our youth and make a meaningful impact, inshallah. Again, the QR code should have been shared online as well on Zoom and hopefully the ICW community group. Our next talk is by Aminah Koshul. She is a graduate of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where she majored in global studies with a concentration in wealth and poverty. She studied abroad in Morocco, and she's currently studying Arabic and Urdu. The title of her talk is Muslim Minorities Across Ocean and Centuries. Please give a warm welcome to Sister Aminah.
Thank you, Sister Asma, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So my topic, as mentioned, is Muslim minorities across oceans and centuries. It is a comparative analysis between Muslims in 16th century Spain and Muslims in America today. Before we get started, there are just 2 things that I would like to point out. First thing, Islam is not a monolith, and Muslims are not monolithic. So please bear in mind that everything I say here is not representative of all Muslims in 16th century Spain, nor is it representative of all Muslim Americans today. The second thing I'd like to point out is that I'm basing much of this presentation on the research of Dr. Aminah and her doctoral thesis at Cambridge University. Her thesis studied the religious writings of Moriscos, and it gives us a fresh perspective on who they were. And it challenges the assumption that they were this insular, secretive minority living in fear. So let's get started with who were the Moriscos. The Moriscos, they converted to Islam during the 8th century Arab conquest. So in the 8th century, as we know, the countries that are known as Spain and Portugal today, or the Iberian Peninsula, were conquered by Muslim armies. And upon this conquest, some of the people living in modern-day Spain and Portugal decided to convert to Islam. And they lived there for centuries. They oversaw the Golden Age. And this time period, to this day, is seen as a model for multicultural and multi-religious societies. So the Moriscos are people who remained in the Iberian Peninsula after the Muslims were expelled by the Spanish Empire. When the Spanish Inquisition started, which was a tribunal to uphold religious orthodoxy, Muslims were faced with two choices. They could convert to Christianity and be allowed to stay, or if they chose to remain Muslim, they faced either death or exile. So Moriscos are the Muslims who chose to stay, and while they converted to Christianity, and many of them were sincere converts, it is widely believed that many of these converts continued to practice Islam in secrecy. So these Muslims suffered the cruelty of the Spanish Inquisition, which is notorious for its brutality until this day. Now let's look at American Muslims, and many of us are familiar with these statistics. So Muslims are about 1% of the population in this country. That's about 3.5 million people. 3/4 of that 3.5 million are immigrants or children of immigrants, largely from Middle Eastern and South Asian backgrounds. The remaining 1/4 are considered Native Americans. So they're people who have been in the U.S. for 3 generations or longer. And by this, we're talking about the African American community. What are some of the similarities between the two groups? So to begin with, both groups assumed a minority status. Both groups were other, which means that they were viewed as incompatible with wider society by virtue of being a religious minority. Both groups are identified as a common enemy, and both groups are essentialized as violent and backwards. So anyone in 16th century Spain who isn't a Catholic is facing some level of persecution. It's seen as tainting the religious purity of the empire. And consequently, in 21st century America, the alt-right is convinced that we as Muslims are disrupting the religious uniformity of this country and that we are waging some kind of culture war. So that's why I included a picture of Bill O'Reilly, who is convinced that Muslims are waging a war on Christmas. Another similarity is that both groups are subjugated by the dominant authority, which we will cover in more detail in the upcoming slides. And lastly, both groups assumed a favorable economic standing in the societies that they lived in. Here is a more detailed slide on the similarities between Moriscos and Muslims. So to begin with, Moriscos are subjects of a Catholic kingdom. Muslims are citizens of a secular nation state. Moriscos are essentialized as greedy and insincere. Muslims are essentialized as violent and backwards. Why are Spanish Moriscos discriminated against? This is done to consolidate the power of the Spanish Empire and to establish the empire as having a staunchly Catholic identity. There's no room for minorities in this national identity. And why are American Muslims discriminated against? Well, mainly, they're dehumanized to justify imperialist exploits of the American military abroad. What are some of the challenges that both of these groups face? So Moriscos, as we know, they faced either death or exile if they didn't convert to Christianity. They had social restrictions imposed on them. They could not speak Arabic, they couldn't pray. Even bathing on Friday was seen as suspicious. And American Muslims, the most common challenge that many of us face today is that we're misrepresented in the media. But on a deeper level, American Muslims are targeted by the carceral state. So this means that we are facing increased surveillance and increased levels of detainment. And the last similarity I'd like to point out is that they assumed a favorable economic standing in their respective societies. So Moriscos worked in the fine arts, and about 24% of American Muslims, according to the Pew Research Center, self-report as being on the high end of the income scale. Now that we've established a basis for comparison, let's look at the Moriscos in more detail. So this is a slide. This screen cap is taken from the Cambridge Muslim College's YouTube channel. This is a presentation that was done by Dr. Ahmed, and these are some of the devotional Morisco writings that we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So this writing says, we're going to read the translation. When you enter the church wall, when you cross yourself, then you recite these Quranic verses. Okay, and when you kneel, because in church when you pray, you're prompted to kneel, then you recite the Surah of Al-Hamdu, meaning you recite Surah Fatiha, you recite Surah Kafirun, and you recite Qul Huwallahu Ahad, because these are the defenses. So we can see that the Moriscos, because they are not allowed to pray in mosques anymore, they have taken the ritual of Islamic prayer and they have converted it to a format that is compatible with the church. So this practice is very much in accordance with the instruction we are given to hold steadfast to the rope of God. So the Moriscos are facing the brutality of the regime, they're facing the cruelty of the Inquisition, their very existence as a religious minority is under threat. But it's inspiring to see how this community remains committed to their faith. And when I came across this presentation, it really made me self-reflect, because we don't, as American Muslims, we don't have any of these restrictions imposed on us. Generally, we have free practice. And so have we started taking that for granted? This is a more detailed slide on how the Moriscos navigated the time in which they lived. So we see creativity in their forms of worship, right? Like reciting Surah Fatiha while kneeling in church. We see in the devotional texts that we use to study them, the texts that were uncovered, we see litanies, prayers, invocations. And we see that these texts provided religious instruction that went beyond the bare minimum. Discourse. This means that Moriscos fulfill their obligations without focusing on their minority status, without worrying about their minority status. And it means that they engage deeply with the prophetic tradition. They maintain a hopeful outlook on life and on their religion. Here are some of the differences I found between Moriscos and American Muslims. And this comparison, I must warn you, is quite critical, but it's also self-implicating, so I'm not singling any one person out here. So to begin with, the Moriscos prioritize what should be done while facing impossible odds. As we saw earlier, they fulfilled their religious obligations. They never lost sight of their true purpose as Muslims, which is to worship God. And they did not succumb to the devastation of their surroundings. They really challenged the idea that they're a tragic community. Americans, on the other hand, mourn the way things are without prompting change. And it is my opinion that this is in large part due to the 24-hour news cycle. The news cycle keeps us informed, but unfortunately it has a paralyzing effect, where we consume so much information, we are rendering ourselves incapable of actually responding to what we see. You know, I'm sure many of us can, off the top of our heads, mention 3 major headlines, like Trump's tax returns, or the way that women are being operated on against their will in ICE detainment centers. Major headlines, which we have come across, but honestly, we are incapable of reacting to them properly. The next difference is that Moriscos had a proactive outlook on life circumstances. So they did not quietly accept defeat, as we saw in the previous slide. When they were banned from praying in mosques, they started praying in churches. American Muslims, on the other hand, it's evident that our political presence in this country is easily overlooked. And I'm not talking about Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, because she is the exception, not the norm. Generally, what I mean is that our stances, even our political stances, are reactive in nature. We like to define ourselves in terms of who we are not, and we have spent no time defining who we actually are. The third difference is that Moriscos spent their time infused with the remembrance of God. So if you look at the manuscripts, like the one showed on the previous slides, if you look in more detail at other similar manuscripts, you see that there are detailed instructions about prayer, about rituals, and the manuscripts actually have a very high quality of religious education. So these are not hastily written notes. They're detailed, they're structured, and this really speaks to the Moriscos and their commitment to their faith in such trying times. American Muslims, on the other hand, view religion as a part-time commitment. And by this, I mean we're just a product of the time that we live in. Since we live in a secular society, the unavoidable result is that religion will be relegated to a second-class priority. So what are some of the lessons learned when drawing this comparison between the two groups? The first lesson is that we should study our history. Okay? Our history is ripe with examples of hope and resilience, both of which are in short supply during these trying times. If we study history, we will feel inspired. We will be able to build on that momentum to carry us forward during such trying times. We should also situate ourselves within the greater context of Islamic history. We should learn from those who came before us. For example, I mentioned earlier that one of the major problems faced by Muslims today is that we are targeted by the partial state. Many Muslims believe that this started happening after 9/11, but that's not the case. Black Muslims who have been here for a much longer time than us have been targeted by the partial state starting in the 1930s. So what I mean to say is that there are examples from our past that we can learn from if only we took the time to study them. The next point, the next lesson here. We are subsumed by an unequal work-life balance. So we should do our best to remind ourselves of our priorities and be conscious of how we spend our time. And thirdly, consumer versus citizens. We should engage critically with the info that we are offered instead of mindlessly consuming media, because ultimately awareness is not a substitute for action. I would just like to make a concluding point that we are not unique in our suffering. Our struggles are unique because of the time that we live in. But we should understand that whether you're a Muslim living 500 years ago in Spain facing the cruelty of the Inquisition, or whether you're an American Muslim in America today, the one constant that we have in our lives is God and His guidance. So with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation, and I hope that everyone has benefited.
Jazakallah khair, Aminah. Thanks for educating us and reminding us on how the challenges of Muslims is not new, and we've overcome this in the past, and inshallah we'll do again. The last portion of this evening's event is interactive. It is led by Brother Assad Koshul. The title is The Impact of Inventions on Humans and Societies. Brother Assad's background is in accounting and finance, organizational development, change management, leadership, and human capital development with experience in diverse industries. He's been active in the Muslim community in New Jersey since an early age and worked in diverse groups for social justice causes. His current work focuses on knowledge integration, concept, and framework development for young professionals and activists. He's a graduate of Rutgers University, a certified public accountant, certified Scrum Master, and ProSci Change Management certified. Please welcome Brother Assad Koshul.
Assalamu alaikum. So as Sister Asma has already mentioned, this is a very interactive program. So if you don't participate, then this session would be considered a failure. So there are times I'm going to ask you to take out your phones and actually Google something. Okay? So only take out your phones when I ask you. Okay. What game are we playing? This is just a rhetorical question. Are we playing chess, checkers, or tic-tac-toe? And what I mean by we, I mean Muslims. And Muslims in the United States. Okay? Just think about that for 5 seconds. At this point, don't raise your hand. Okay, sure. What is open inquiry? Any ideas? You can take out your phone and Google. Any ideas? And if you do have an idea, you can come to the microphone there and mention what you do. And for those of us who attend Toastmasters, you know we do this a lot because through this method, people actually learn and retain the information. So any ideas on what open inquiry is? Oh, so you want to take a crack at it? Okay.
Open inquiry is when you have.
Just turn on the microphone.
or I'll just be real loud, but open inquiry is when you have a student that asks a question, for example, and then they formulate that question, and then they try to go back to the question. The way they go back to it is by experimenting.
Very good. Anyone else want to take a crack at that? So we'll move on. What is structured inquiry? Anybody have an idea of what that is? Okay, so I'll give the explanation for structured inquiry. This is a session of structured inquiry, where you have a teacher or an instructor that's developed a framework and is going to lead you to a series of questions and then leave the decision up to you. Open inquiry is much more that the students decide the problem, they decide the research method, and then they decide their own conclusions or solutions to the problem. Okay? And these are two methods of inquiry. What is the most important invention in human history? Now this you can just shout out. Any ideas? So I have the whiteboard. It's a big whiteboard today, inshallah. You can shout out, if you were asked this question, what is the most important invention in history, what would you say? Karate. Karate, okay. Karate. Okay. Printing press, what else? I'm sorry, someone said light? Okay, what else?
Car.
Okay, someone said light. Okay, I'm sorry, I can't. Car, what else? Okay, internet. Any other ideas? Again, look at the wording. What is the most important invention in history? I-N-T, oops. E-R-N-E-T.
The wheel.
Okay. Somebody said wheel? Okay, very good, wheel. What else? I'm sorry?
Light.
Huh?
Light.
White?
Light.
Light. We have light.
Flight.
Oh, flight, air flight. Okay. Flight. Okay. One more? Huh? Clock and telephone. Okay, so we'll put clock and clock. Okay. Very good. Okay, inshallah. And I am under a time constraint of a total of 30 minutes. So the group, inshallah, has come up with karate, printing press, light, car, internet, wheel, flight, and clock. These are some of the inventions according to one website. Printing press, light, automobile, telephone, radio, vaccination, computer, airplane, anesthesia. Pretty standard. And if you would have had 5-10 minutes, you would probably come up with this, right? Here's another, according to history.com, it's a printing press, the compass, steel, electric light, domestication of the horse, which I'm surprised nobody got, like domestication of animals, but the transistor, magnifying glass, the telegram, antibiotics, and the steam engine. So the lists are fairly similar. Standard answers, valid answers, but there's nothing factually incorrect about the answer. But I would argue they might not be sufficient answers, especially given our current situation. So I will ask this question another way. What is the most important scientific invention? And other than karate, everything is scientific. And I think Horace was trying to be a comedian when he said karate. It's okay, it was fun. But martial arts is an invention, and it does have major implications on that society. Like if you had a drinking problem, you couldn't become a martial artist. So in that sense, Horace is not wrong. Okay? So Horace, don't mind what I mentioned. Okay? It's okay. Horace is, oh yeah, I did thank Horace and Bella for coming to set up earlier. Okay? So thanks for coming to set up. All right, what is, so I'm asking the question now in a different way. What is the most important political invention? Just think of only political inventions. Any ideas on this? Now we're going toward a structured inquiry, right? Because all of our minds are trained to think from the scientific perspective, right? When we hear the word invention, we think science, right? Political invention. Rhetorical question. What is the most important political invention? And there's not one, but they're all political inventions, right? Something happens in politics that is totally new. Huh?
I would say.
Yeah.
So for this one, it's going to depend on what area you're looking at, but you would say that the most important political invention, for example, like you had the 100 Years' War, that allowed modern day territories to be created, which then further allowed for maps to be created. If you were to talk about post-World War I, you had the Treaty of Versailles. You had new concepts that popped up across the globe. So I think for this question, there's not really a right or wrong answer. But if I had to pick one, it would probably be systems of government that were created.
Very good. Excellent. Like systems of government, like the Roman Senate was a political invention. So the first point I want to make is let's think a little out of the box. Let's not always link science. When we link invention, let's not always link invention with science. What is the most important? Social invention. Any ideas on this? What invention would be considered a social invention and it had an enormous impact on humanity? Huh? Facebook, excellent. Okay, internet then, yes. Now this is very, because internet is no longer just a technology tool. It is a social invention. Any other ideas? Shout out. You're not going to mic.
Social sciences.
Social sciences, very good. Like even the term social science is an invention. So think about this for a moment. How about if our major social invention is the Prophet ﷺ giving women the right to inheritance? It's an enormous social invention. The Prophet ﷺ requiring women get inheritance is an enormous social invention. And everyone has masks on, so it's a lot harder to speak, because I can't read your facial expressions. But think about that for a moment. The Prophet ﷺ giving women the right to inheritance is an enormous social change and social change phenomenon. Yes, sister?
I would have said religion, but what is the difference? What is the difference between like a social invention in religion and like ordinance like that?
Okay, very good question. And I will inshallah address that as we go. But here we're talking, see, religion can be so encompassing. So let me address it now, right? But here we're talking one specific guideline or parameter, or let's say law, that the Prophet required. That was transformation in that society. I mean, religion is an awfully big impact, right? But this we can talk specifically that all of a sudden, if the women in a society have the right to inheritance, it transforms that society. It puts them in less of a totally subservient situation. Okay, so there's a social invention. One is this idea of role-based bureaucracy. That in an organization, this person is the accountant, this person is this person is the administrator, that a bureaucracy in which there are roles. And you're identified with a role. That is a social invention. The nation state is a social invention. The corporation is a social invention. Okay. Now, let's look at role-based two cases. One is if you look in the West, if you were a young person, you became a soldier, you were a soldier for life. If you were a baker, you were a baker for life. So if you look at many common names, say for example in England, like Smith and Cook, why those last names? Because someone was a smith, someone was a blacksmith, someone had a profession in which they were a builder or something. Like a blacksmith worked with iron, and that just became their last name. If you were a cook, that became your last name because you were a cook. Your family was in the cooking business. You were a cook. So your last name became Cook. So if you look in Western history, you see a lot of these type of names like Smith Wigg. Those are people who actually weave baskets. So we even have this in the Indian subcontinent when we say like Mosewala, right? That means that previous generations, that family what used to sew socks and clothes. So people were identified with the profession they were in. Now, India caste system is very interesting. One, activities divided a person. And the caste system, what does it do? It's a long kinship over generations. It's a social invention. And you can't escape that caste system. So what happens is the person and the activity is fused. Like there's a certain caste in India, I'm not sure offhand what the name is, maybe someone would know. Like their job is only to burn the bodies at funerals. And that's all that they do. Generation after generation after generation, their role is to burn the bodies of dead Indians. And they are identified with that profession, and now that it's just not a profession, it's also a boxing in of a caste. So this is a social invention. It's a social invention. Now, there's actually literature that's come out in the last couple of years about the caste system, how it's hurting the American IT industry because of the caste system. Because although they may come, you have people coming from India on H-1 visas, when they develop a certain critical mass in different companies and institutions, they do retreat politically to their castes. And this is even documented even in Silicon Valley, which in theory should be just a meritocracy. So think, you're 10, 12 time zones away from where you came, but the caste system is playing a role even in Silicon Valley. And it is a social convention. So the nation state. Nation state came about for three reasons. One, due to increased mobility, we could move. Two, breaking of lineages, blood ties were not as important. And three, reduced identification with villages and geography. The nation state is a social invention because you were no longer born in a village, married, grew up in the village, married in the village, died in the village, were buried right outside the village. So from that perspective, the nation state is a political as well as a social invention, unprecedented in history. For these three main reasons: the mobility, the breaking of family ties and lineages, and reduced identification with villages. So what did we have here? We did have like flight. But because of the flight, it has impacted people's livelihood, not just from a business perspective. It has a tremendous social impact. In about 17 hours of flight time, you could be in Islamabad alone. It's about 18 and a half hours from Chicago to New Delhi. So impact of social inventions. And my very first question was, what game are we playing? Chess, checkers, or tic-tac-toe? Now let's think about it as we go through the structured inquiry. The corporation, it's a social entity. You cannot be arrested or go to prison. It has no physical corpus. You have a legal structure. You can't be prison or arrest. Now, there are corporations like Exxon that are more powerful than entire countries. What are the implications? And we just can't see this through a business lens. We have to begin to analyze and interpret these things through a social lens. Gangs in the USA, I give this example so the young people can understand, they're social inventions. There are people, whether they're the Bloods or the Crips or the Latin Kings or these different types of gangs, they identify more with the gang than their own families. They identify more with their gang than they do the church minister or priest. their allegiance to the gangs is a blood oath. They won't turn on a gang member, even if it means that they're going to get 25 years in prison. It's a social invention. What would make an 18, 19-year-old person join a group and be more loyal to that group than to their own mom or dad or to the church? Social invention. And we have to analyze these things through a little bit more critical lens so we can understand the magnitude of the problem. This is a social problem. Someone breaks ties of family and kinship, and even with their high school sports coach, even with the priest in the church, to join a gang. Social invention. I will argue the Ummah is a social invention. Whose mother language is also Farsi. He becomes part of the Ummah. And in the most elevated ways, right, which is in the Prophet's hospital. It's a social invention. So as we talk about the religion, we also have to talk about the religion in this construct as one of the sisters has said. Because then it can be understood. And just think about the genius of the Prophet, how he maneuvers this situation. Because this is such an ingenious Sahaba. He's come up with an entirely new military strategy. The Sahaba are odd. They want to claim them for themselves. And the Prophet also threads that needle. What fantastic negotiating prowess. So, is this permanent or voluntary? The village you're from, the church or mosque you're affiliated with, or social group interfamily ties. Permanent or temporary or voluntary? Any ideas? Yes, someone on the left? I don't want to give the answers now. It's supposed to be structured inquiries. Permanent. Okay, very good. Anybody else, please? Chime in, yes? Huh? Why is it voluntary? brother says voluntary, one sister says permanent. It's true, throughout history, it's been permanent. Because where you were born, you probably died. And the church or mosque you were affiliated with, that was a church or mosque for life. And social groups and interfamily ties. That was the major form of alliances and protection. Not just in Arab society, even in Europe. But now I argue, these used to be permanent. Now they're all voluntary. Everybody knows religion is on the decline, not just in the West. You go to church or mosque on any periodic holidays. Village, some of us have never been to our ancestral village in 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And even interfamily ties, we break ties. It's just the nature of the modern world. So what I want to emphasize here, this is a social invention. These three things that were considered permanently historically until maybe about 75, 80 years ago are now voluntary. So I will say this even in a public forum. If your child decides to stay Muslim in this country, it's because they decide to stay Muslim, not because you want them to, or you can force them. What is the most important? Economic invention. Okay? So, I will put this up. This is the AC, because I'm under a time constraint. This is the air conditioner, this is the microwave, this is the smartphone. Now, I follow 5 minutes, so I need to go through very quick. The air conditioner, as Asimov said, one of the things that began to bring about the decline of American society was the invention of the air conditioner. He said when the air conditioner was established, people began to stop socializing and interacting with neighbors. They would stay inside their house in their air conditioner. That's his argument. The microwave, now if you want a home-cooked meal, you don't have to be home at a certain time. You can be even home and not even come out of your room. You don't even need to, with your acknowledge that your mother may have cooked the food. You go at your convenience. There's no eye contact between the person who cooked the food and those consuming it. That is a social invention. Because before, if you wanted a hot meal, you had to acknowledge the person that cooked the food. It extended that courtesy and respect. You have to do that anymore with the microwave. You did at your convenience, not at the convenience of the person who cooked it. And that has tremendous social implications. For example, in the early 90s, there's a Sikh who came to New Jersey. And he said something very interesting. He said, people are asking me all these ideas about Sikh thought stuff. He said, the only advice I have for you living here in the West is just make sure you have dinner together as a family. That was the Sikh's advice to the Sikh people in northern Jersey. Just make sure that you have dinner together with your family. Because he said, I go to people's houses and I see no family in an entire month has had dinner together. Sam Brockman, he's the founder of the Brockman Dynasty and he's the chairman of the World Jewish Congress. Question, when he was asked, what is the most important invention in history, what do you think he said? Any ideas? I have 3 minutes. Any idea what he said? No Googling. Okay. He said interest rate. Sam Brockman asked what is the most important invention in human history. He did not say wheel. He did not say flight. He did not say vaccines. He did not say the printing press. He did not say paper. He said interest rate. He did not even say printed currency. According to history.com, the third most important invention in history, which I kind of, to do structured inquiry, I took it off of it, it's paper currency. He said interest. It's not a car, it's not the motor, it's not light, it's not electricity. He said interest rate. Now, what are the implications? That there are people who run global finance and institutions who think the most important invention in human history is interest rate. What are the implications? Interest rate, it is the equivalent of old-fashioned usury. It's a honey trap for mankind. It is a burden of debt that is impoverished states and persons. It is an ugly aberration of globalization and tempted by the fixed interest rate on the dollar. And the most radical idea of all, that this one thinker is saying, I'm not going to mention his name, he said, this is the second fall of Adam. After eating off the tree, accepting interest is a non-Muslim thinker. What does Sam Brockman ask? What does it say? What is the most important invention in human history? It doesn't say wheel or printing press. It says interest rate. He says interest rate. And we are not eradicating poverty unless we as Muslims and other socially conscious people can address this issue. And I don't argue to say that there's a solution in 3 years or 5 years. But what I raised early on, what game are we playing? Unless we're even asking this question, we are not even playing chess. It is tic-tac-toe. It is tic-tac-toe. That is the game we as Muslims are playing. Tic-tac-toe. It's like when the Indonesian rupiah collapsed in 1997. All of a sudden, 100 million Indonesians go below the poverty line. So, to close, this is why the project that the young people are doing on microfinance is very important. Let's at least begin to crawl in that direction. This is why our status is minorities here. Rather than be victims, though, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help will come if you're willing to put in the time and the effort. And we need to develop our intellectual arsenals so we can have intelligent conversations on real issues. Entire states are impoverished because there are people who believe that they run global finance. The most important invention in human history is not even the well. Because now, with the invention of the well, we didn't have to live by a river. It's interest rate. So this was the idea. To, again, not convince you of anything, but at least try to raise a question in such a way where you're looking at the material difference. When we talk about inventions, we should think about social inventions, the political inventions, and the economic inventions. And we should be looking at structural problems and structural deficits. Okay, Charlotte, so I'll close with that. Thank you very much for your attention. And this is my point, I'm sorry. It's with the clash of ideas that the frontiers of knowledge are truly open. And going back to the issue of open inquiry, there's no such thing as understanding without open inquiry or at least structured inquiry. Okay, Charlotte. I think 8:30, right, Alex? We have? Yeah, we have until 8:30.
Okay, so I invite all the speakers back up real quick for a short Q&A session. If anyone from the audience has any questions for,
So I
say,
think they can ask any question on any topic.
anytime, yeah.
Make sure you ask any questions for our youngsters, okay?
Let me ask the youngsters.
Right.
I thought I was loud enough.
Good.
Yeah, I've been involved with Kiva for past about 20 years or so. There are quite a few Muslim-related groups also. There's like an Islam group, a Muslim group. So where did you start?
So for those that didn't hear the question, because Dr. Shazad didn't go up to the mic, he says that he's involved in Kiva for nearly 2 decades now. There's multiple Muslim groups on there. When did we start? We started back in May of 2020, so 5 months ago, and ever since then we've been meeting about once a week for about 45 minutes, just over Zoom, going over different ideas and whatnot of how we can bring Kiva to the Muslim community and to Patreon.
First of all, great presentations. Question on the Kiva platform. So help me understand what is the return that you provide to people who invest or provide funds? So why would let's say we contribute something and that's okay, we can support, but in terms of being able to scale this, taking this from a $3,000 investment to $300,000 someday so you can help more, how would you be able to attract people to it, and what would be the return on the money that they invest in you?
So Brother Russell, do you want to join us for this part? Because he's a captain, although Brother Russell didn't speak, he's a captain of the Kiva team.
Yeah, when people lend the money, I guess they invest in the platform. So what would they be getting back? That's Sadaqah side. So in terms of being able to scale and people can invest more into it.
Okay, so what do people get back when they invest in the platform? Well, you would treat it like a loan. You could take the money back if you wanted to. But for example, I've been on the platform for 10 years, and I treat it just as charity. And so I give the money. I give $25 to one of the people they profiled, and then after a year or 2 years, that 25 comes back into my account, and then I just turn around and give it to the next person. So it becomes a continuous charity in that respect, right? And so you're enabling one person to fish, as they mentioned, and then you're helping the next person with those same funds. So if you're in a situation where you need to withdraw the money, you can, and it's secure, and the team has no access to that. That's your funds from your account. But you always have the ability to re-lend, and that's what we hope. And that's the multiple impact that they mentioned of $1,000 over the course of 25 years would be an impact besides 325.
Any other questions?
Thank you everyone for your insightful presentations. My question is to Aminah about the history presentation. You had mentioned that like a sort of suppression to the Muslim community in the Iberian Peninsula was banning them to pray in the mosques. But conversely, our like the way that we are being suppressed, for example, is USA attacking like home countries abroad, and you had mentioned that point. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit more.
Right, so thank you for your question. My presentation primarily had to do with American Muslims and the role that we can play in furthering the cause of the Muslim Ummah. Of course, I recognize that the U.S. military is imperialistic and exploit abroad. Of course, we're not facing the material consequences of that, but as members of that country, we do face the psychological consequences to an extent. So, primarily my focus is on how we as Muslims can further our cause here, and by extension, we will be able to further our cause abroad. So I hope that answers your question.
Sorry. Why did you guys use Kiva as the platform? Is there no other platform, or is there, is Kiva the best one out there, or why Kiva pretty much?
Okay, so the reason we did Kiva is because it's efficient, it's working, you have the 501c3 status also, and then a big factor was you can actually see the end user. Because there's some good Muslim platforms, but you can't see the end user. And one of the reasons was to get the youth heavily engaged. And so when the youth can actually look at a case study of a sister in Senegal with 6 other people with her, and she's looking to go from 2 cattle to 6 cattle, and then she says when she gets to 6, she'll be able to send her child to school. That level of detail is there in the lending cases, which is not in the other platforms. And so that was our main motivation. Now, inshallah, as time passes, hopefully, we as a community, we reach a level of sophistication that we can do that, right? But it's transparent because Kiva has people on the ground that validate the loans. Right? And so, like, if you send money from here to your local masjid in Pakistan, it's in the imam's discretion whether he's validated the loans or not. So that was the reason at this stage. Yes.
The second question, does Kiva also work in the US?
Yes, they do. Okay. For example, they have a specific fund for people who want to loan to COVID. But our emphasis, as the group said, was Muslim women. Because usually when Muslim women get loans in developing countries, they raise the standard of their children. Because our focus is always improving their situation so they can get their children to better schools and things like that. And the data is indisputable and incontrovertible. The guy might decide to take it and start a new business, and they'll lose all the money. It's just a reality. So, any other questions? We have 6 more minutes. Okay. All right, so inshallah, that's it. Sister.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Assad, and all the speakers and guests. I hope you enjoy the evening and are interested in being part of the thought leadership. ICW Toastmasters has produced a lot of good content and programs. For example, we had a 4-part series on career choice and serving humanity by Brother Assad Koshul. We had benefits of odd jobs for high school and college students by Brother Hussain. We also had society and sports by Assad Koshul. At Toastmasters, our objective is not just to improve public speaking, but to provide valuable intelligence, teach career development and enhancement skills, and cultural competency. What you have seen today is somewhat similar to our regular Toastmaster meetings. I highly encourage all of you to attend. ICW Toastmasters meets the first and third Saturday of every month here at ICW or on Zoom from 11:30 to 1. Our next meeting is next Sunday, October 17th. There's also a new college level course that is starting here at ICW as part of the Leadership Institute. The instructors will simplify complex concepts and the material will spark thoughtful discussion. The title of the course is Practicing Islam in the Modern West. The professors are Dr. Farouk Ramanovich, Michael Owens, and Brother Assad. It's a structured class on Fridays, 7 to 9, starting October 23rd. For details and to register, call Brother Aslam at 847-530-9471. Jazakallah khair for attending. Isha prayers will be shortly. Assalamu alaikum.